right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today, and especially to talk about ethics, because it is something that I really am passionate about. Let's see, am I unmuted now? Am I good? All right. And I do want to say that I have to give credit for most of what you're going to hear today to the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, which is the organization that has been home to our professional ethics in this profession for many years. So that's why you will see that credit here on the screen, and the website is there on this first screen if you want to learn more about CCVA. So let's consider this word ethics. How would you define it? What does it mean to you to behave ethically? For me, it's one of those words, those things that I kind of know what I mean when I say it, but it's tough to put it into a definition. Hard to know how to explain it because it is complicated. So here is one definition that comes from the internationally renowned Josephson Institute for Ethics. And they define ethics as a set of principles that define behavior as right, good, and proper. So that sounds pretty simple, right? However, they go on to clarify and remind us that the term ethics and the term values are not the same. I think many of us use these kind of interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same. Most values actually have nothing to do with ethics because they don't dictate how a moral person should behave. So for example, I can be very honest with you and tell you that one of my values is being highly organized, which certainly affects my behavior, both professionally and personally. But that value does not tell me anything about right or wrong. However, if I tell you that I also value being respectful of other people, then we can immediately feel a connection to ethical behavior and what behavior is good and proper. We know that a lot of NGOs and businesses have codes of ethics these days. Sometimes they're posted up on the wall, and they have lots of good reasons for having those codes. Ethics can definitely mean different things to different people, so we have to keep that in mind, but that makes it extra complicated and confusing. And lastly, ethical dilemmas do occur when ethical values clash with each other, and I'm going to go into that more in just a minute. So what does this general definition and theory have to do with our work with volunteers? Well, let's start with a very simple idea that we all can understand. Think of ethics as a backpack that each of us carries with us. Your ethics backpack is part of who you are and influences how you behave. It is deeply personal and unique. Yes, I may have some of the same contents in my backpack as you have in yours, but other content could be quite different. Therefore, we can never assume that another's ethical backpack is exactly the same as our own. Now let's look a little bit more closely at what is in this ethical backpack. There are actually 3 buckets of contents. So the first are our personal ethics, and these are just that. They're mine, they're very subjective, and they are influenced by my history, my experience, perhaps my religious beliefs, perhaps my ethnic culture, influenced by lots of things over my lifetime. My personal ethics is what guides my immediate reaction to a situation. it's what prompts that little voice that pops up and says, oh, that's not right. That person is not behaving ethically. And so it also is what defines doing the right thing for me personally. The next group of contents in this backpack are organizational ethics. And these are sets of principles that govern the behavior of a group of people. This is where codes of ethics come in, or some organizations call them guiding values. The purpose of these organizational values or ethical principles is to ensure consistency of action. Because when you're part of a group or an organization, either as an employee or even as a volunteer, we can't have everybody just acting according to their own personal ethics. We have to have something that everyone agrees on, that they will abide by those rules when they are representing our organization. And then the third bucket of content is professional ethics. And these are values and principles that apply to a specific field of activity. And probably when you hear professional ethics, you think immediately of medical professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. There are fundraising professionals now have codes of ethics. Human resources managers, personnel managers have their codes of ethics. Lots of professions have them these days. And they define a universally accepted set of practices in those kinds of settings. And that's the type of ethics we're going to talk about mostly today. So with all of this content in our backpacks, is it any surprise that sometimes there's conflict? Hopefully there's a great deal of overlap and synergy between these three types of ethics in our own backpacks. But it's very possible that something in our personal ethics could clash with what's in organizational ethics or professional ethics. And that's when ethical dilemmas occur, and it's why they are so difficult to navigate. Believe it or not, the discussion of ethics related to volunteer management first began about 50 years ago, when our role of volunteer management was struggling to be recognized as a legitimate type of paid work. Ethics is one of the defining characteristics for any profession, and the first statement of ethics in volunteer administration was developed in the 1970s as a way for practitioners back then to signal to their colleagues and their bosses that they took this work very seriously. Later on, this early document was updated and revised by members of the Association for Volunteer Administration, AVA, based on research done by the Josephson Institute that I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, AVA as an association had to dissolve in 2006. And so at that time, the ownership of the ethics material was transferred to CCVA. And then it was updated again in 2016 to make sure that it remained relevant and useful to practitioners and also educators. So that's just a little bit of background on where this material comes from. Now that we understand the three types of ethics in our backpack, let's look more closely at that professional ethics bucket of content. This slide shows the 5 core values for volunteer engagement professionals: citizenship, respect, accountability, fairness, and trust. You may wonder where they came from. How is it decided that these would be the values that would be at the heart of our professional ethics? Well, years ago, the Josephson Institute conducted extensive international research throughout the globe, which led to the conclusion that all kinds of people everywhere agree on a set of core ethical values, or what Josephson called the pillars of character. Now, when I first heard this, I was astounded that all kinds of people, human beings around the world, with all sorts of backgrounds, could agree on a common set of core values to guide behavior. We don't all call them the same things, but this research demonstrated that at the heart of those, there are these ideas, these concepts that we all believe in are in promoting moral, good behavior. So these universal values have become the basis for many professional codes of ethics, including ours. Now, I'm going to walk through each of these in more detail, and there's a one-page handout, which I believe Rhiannon might have been sent out in advance, but also I think she's going to put a link in the chat so you can download it. So this summarizes the actual core values and principles that I'm going to review quickly here, and means you don't have to take a bunch of notes and everything. You can just use that one pager if you'd like. So the first one is citizenship. The administrator volunteers understands that volunteerism is a foundation of civil societies and guides the organization and its stakeholders toward active community participation. Under this value, there are 3 principles, and you'll see the same format is carried through the entire document. Under citizenship, we have the responsibility that we have as professionals to have a clear personal philosophy on volunteerism. We must facilitate a compassionate and caring culture in our organizations, and we must cultivate and model a philanthropic spirit of giving time and resources. The second value is respect. And this involves acknowledging the inherent value, skills, and abilities of all individuals and affirming the mutual benefit gained by both volunteer and the organization. Under this value, there are 3 principles of dignity, upholding the right of all volunteers to be valued and involved in decisions that affect them. The principle of inclusivity, very relevant today, encouraging participation of individuals from diverse backgrounds and abilities. And of course, privacy, very familiar one to all of us, right? Protecting the confidentiality of individuals and information. The next value is accountability, demonstrating a responsibility to the organization, its stakeholders, and our profession. So here we see how we're sort of at this hub with a connection to those other buckets in our backpack. This includes the principle of collaboration, where we cultivate lots of partnerships, the principle of continuous improvement, which means that we need to continue as individuals to pursue excellence by enhancing our professional competence and maintaining certifications and fostering innovation. And the third principle here of professionalism, providing outstanding service to our organization and the people that it serves. The next value is fairness. We commit to individual and collective efforts that build and support a fair and just organizational culture. And here we see some more terms that are so familiar to us and so relevant to today. Impartiality, that means that we must remain unbiased and objective when we're working with the stakeholders. Equity, ensuring access to opportunities, resources, and support which enable volunteers to be successful. And justice, implementing open and consistent processes that inform decision-making and address discriminatory or prejudicial behaviors. And the last value is trust. We must maintain loyal and trusting relationships with all stakeholders and be dedicated to providing a safe environment based on established standards of practice. Principles here include honesty. We have to be truthful and strive for transparency. Integrity, demonstrating consistency between what we say and what we do. And we know that volunteers have a sixth sense about that, right? They can detect very quickly whether, what you all say on your website is not exactly what I see going on in this organization. So that's a very important one, and includes addressing conflicts of interest as well when they pop up. And then lastly, commitment, which is about acting in a forthright manner with good intent and following through on promises and agreements, which again, we know mean so much and are so important when we're working with volunteers. Now, I realize this has been a very quick introduction to the values and principles of our profession. There's a lot here to think about, and you're going to get to explore that a little bit further in this next, the rest of this hour. I'm sure that many of these words are familiar and not surprising to you. There's similar language that pops up in many codes of ethics, which is a good thing. And I actually find that very comforting, that this is not a set of new terminology. These are words that we're all very familiar with, and they echo in many other parts of our lives. In this document, those words have been tailored to the context in which we do our work. And I really encourage you to create some future opportunities to walk through these together and talk more about them as they relate to your work on the ground. Lastly, just want to share this wonderful quote with you. To me, this emphasizes and drives home the point that behaving ethically often requires courage. Moral courage, the quality of mind and spirit that enables us to face up to ethical dilemmas firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. Practicing ethics in the real world is hard work. It can definitely make us want to run in the opposite direction and say, no, I don't want to deal with this. This is horrible. I'd rather just sort of ignore it. It does make us flinch sometimes. But by honing the skill of ethical decision-making, that's the way we build that moral courage and gain the confidence that we need to navigate the dilemmas we encounter in our daily work.